And I would really appreciate it if you would stop Rob Taylor from blathering on and on.
Opinions expressed by talk show hosts, callers, or guests on the Rob Taylor Report do not necessarily represent the opinions of the hosting platform, subsidiaries, sponsors, or possibly anyone else on the planet or the known universe. From the tinfoil and lead-lined broadcast bunker on the beautiful southern coast of Oregon, it's the Rob Taylor Report. So strap yourself in. Your weekly political therapy session is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is, the nearly famous Rob Taylor.
And I'm Rob Taylor, and I'm a specialist in political therapy. Hopefully you won't need too much, but once we go through this, you'll be all right. And today we're not going to be talking so much politics. We're really going to be talking about the Bureau of Land Management and the ONC lands. But before I go any further, I want to let you know that we're recording this on Wednesday, February 21st, and that's why it's playing right now. I've just decided to go ahead and record the show, play it on Monday as a recording, because I think this guest deserves every bit of attention that she needs, because this is a very important issue. This is an important issue for our county and 18 other counties in Oregon and California. And today, ironically, we're not going to be playing Where's 3H Tree Service. I know you're all disappointed, but we're not going to be playing Where's 3H Tree Service. So don't bother going looking for them, because we ain't playing. And so I just want you to know that we've got a lot of guests coming up. I've been doing a lot of work and getting some very special guests on the show. And I'm really excited for this next interview because, like I said, we've got a court case for Coos County that's moving forward. We're not the only county involved, but Coos County, we're going to be moving forward with this court case that's gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and they're going to be arguing about the money that is owed to the counties from the ONC lands. And we're going to find out what my next guest knows about it. But first, I want to find out a little bit about her. So I want to introduce her. And this is Denise Barrett. She is the executive director for Forest Bridges. How you doing, Denise?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Rob.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And I was really excited that Charlene was able to get you on here, because I think this is a very important issue. I don't think people even realize how much land this covers. I mean, I was looking it up on the ONC lands on the Bureau of Land Management website. And it says the Oregon and California Railroad reinvested lands, known as the ONC lands, lie in a checkerboard pattern through 18 counties of Western Oregon. These lands contain more than 2.4 million acres of forest with a diversity of plant and animal species, recreation areas, mining claims, grazing lands, cultural and historical resources, scenic areas, wild and scenic rivers, and wilderness. Most of the ONC lands are administered by the Bureau of Land Management. The history of the ONC lands goes back to 1866, when Congress established the land grant to promote rapid completion of the Oregon section of the Portland to San Francisco Railroad. So you're kind of dealing with a very historic issue, don't you think?
Yeah, it has a long history. And if I can just politely add to how Forest Bridges sees these lands, we actually define the lands a little bit differently. We incorporate into a land base of 2.9 million acres of ONC lands, which are only in Oregon, by the way. It's 18 counties in Western Oregon. But they include the ONC lands that the BLM manages. There's the Coos Bay Wagon Road lands, which are also incorporated into those. There's public domain lands that the BLM manages in Western Oregon. And then we also have about 500,000 acres of U.S. Forest Service O&C lands, sometimes known as the controverted lands. And so all together, you roll them up and it's 2.9 million acres. So it's even bigger than the 2.4 million. And it's complicated by having two federal land management agencies, although the BLM is obviously managing the lion's share.
So you mentioned the Coos Bay Wagon Road land. Now there's a distinction between the O&C lands that were established in 1937 through an act of Congress, and then in 1939, the Congress also established the Wagon Road lands. And so many of us in the county, and especially the county commissioners, would probably consider them completely two separate lands. Are you saying that you look at them as something that should be together, or can count it as together?
It's all, if you look at all of the lands which we can describe as O&C lands, whether it's the BLM managed or whether it's the Forest Service, these lands have the 1937 O&C Act as that primary law. And then there's other laws and regulations that are applied in the management of the lands, including some of the, NEPA, the Air Act and other acts that cover things, Clean Water Act and whatnot.
The one other difference that I got to distinguish between the two is that the way I understood the 1937 Act of the O&C lands is that they were reinvested lands where they literally, I think, took them back from the railroad companies who were not selling them the way they should have been sold. And the Wagon Road land was actually purchased from a private person. So that is another distinction between the two. Do you guys talk about that, or see the
one
difference?
of the things that I think is for us as a nonprofit working in trying to put together ecologically based solutions and trying to get the lands to be better managed, is that history is important. But it doesn't really get in our way. We spend a lot more time. We put up front and forward that with our principles of agreement, which have been developed collaboratively across the table with timber and forest industry, conservation, recreation, tribal input, and other in the public, we basically are saying, okay, that act stands, and that act stands. For us primarily as sustained yield, that we can do our kind of forestry that we were talking about and maintain sustained yield, which is the basis of that act. Whilst for us, we're what we call habitat driven. We focus on developing habitats across the lands using different kinds of approaches and being specific to different types of forests, the dry forests, the moist forests, and what we also have some mixes of those called the transitional forests. So we don't get necessarily involved in the interpretation of the history. We leave that, I think, to the Association of Oregon O&C counties, which do an excellent job at that. And I think you're mentioning they're part of the litigation that is currently they're attempting to go up to the Supreme Court with. Yes,
absolutely. That's and I should have mentioned the O&C group, the organization of all the O&C counties in that one group. So how was Forest Bridges? Is that how you guys came together as a nonprofit, was specifically dealing with the O&C lands? And
yeah,
was that, how did you become executive director of this group? Tell us about both.
Yeah, I've been around a little bit less than 2 years, and we can go into my history a little bit later if you want to. I came aboard at a time when the organization was founded in 2015 by some local guys, that two of which were more involved in the conservation side and one on the timber side, although that individual is very sort of minded towards being able to incorporate what we call ecological forestry type approaches. So they came together at a time where they felt that there still needed to be work to get the lands to work for all interests and viewpoints. And so there had been a couple of attempts at legislation at the federal level that didn't go as far as they could have. The organization therefore started with, three guys saying, okay, well, what could we start doing? And what's interesting is they started to say, okay, what can we agree on, and what can others, if we bring them together in this collaborative? And the Cow Creek tribe was involved a lot in the beginning, and still is with us, and just a whole host of conservationists, folks from the forest industry, recreation. And we also reached out to Oregon State University and a whole host of experts and scientists who are working in this field. So I guess what they're saying is that from 2015 onward, they felt that there had never been really a grassroots approach. The legislation that had been developed in the past, whilst probably had some merits, was in many ways kind of top down and not really coming up from the grassroots. And so I think our primary ethos is collaborative, coming from the grassroots, creating a public base of support so that we can, if we need to at some point, turn to our congressional leaders and say maybe some of this can help these lands be better managed. There's also a whole host of issues related to, the decreased public access to the lands. We'd love to see the solutions to the legal quagmires of the law, the sort of the lawsuits that just come up at times when restoration is so much needed, especially when we look at the dry forests in the South and in general across these lands, just like all the other lands that we have in Oregon. They're just so faced with so much wildfire threat and what we call like species losses and disease and other things. It's just a shame that, for example, in the dry forest, they're so overstocked, and there's just a need to be able to start, properly managing them, thinning them out, improving the fire resilience, whilst also improving the habitats and the whole overall health and sustainability of these lands.
That's one of the biggest complaints, especially by those of us who live in Oregon and have been here for a long time, is that we have been very upset with the way the federal government has managed many of their lands in the state of Oregon. And they own 54% of the land mass in our state, which is, that's not unusual for states that are west of the Mississippi. If you look at any state that's east of the Mississippi before, the movement westward, they didn't own as much land in those states. And I think Texas is like less than 1% of federal government owned property. And so one of the things that really is upsetting to a lot of people here in Oregon is the fact that they're not managing our land, and we see a lot of it burn up. And what does your group, what is it focusing on that you would like to get from the federal government when it comes to management of these forests?
Yeah, a good example, just in the last month, we developed and submitted to the Forest Service. It was our first time, we tend to be talking to the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, as you're saying, just because they are almost, synonymous with the ONC lands. But so we really took a crack at pulling together our strategies and adapting them with the view of what the Forest Service was looking for as it updates the Northwest Forest Plan. They had a specific remit or specific set of goals. They wanted better advice on how to address wildfire. They wanted, how to better engage the tribes. Other things having to do with climate change. That's of course a question. Old growth. I'm just looking at my notes here, but I had it close by. And the thing that we're not getting enough harvest out of the lands. And so we took a very methodical approach to being able to address all of their questions for each of the forest types. So again, sort of the dry forests need to be thinned. You can still retain old growth, but you need to thin them and use prescribed fire really carefully because there are liability issues, as you say in this checkerboard, where different lands meet, different land ownership meets. And also just to really try to take care of the land in a way that can be sustained in the long term. So what we've seen is that oftentimes there's goodwill by the land management agencies, but there's different obstacles that are getting in their way. And I'm not trying to defend them, but we work on the ground in terms of our engagement with these folks. And we meet a lot of BLM, foresters, for example, who would like to be able to manage the lands better, but we know that the scale is maybe not to what can happen. Sometimes as I said, the lawsuits come in the way and stop some of the plans that they have to thin or to harvest, depending upon what it is. Vegetative management, I think, is the term they're often using. And just in general, there aren't enough resources, being applied in the right way. But I think if you get the whole system to work, and we call our approach an all lands based approach, in which we're really trying to use kind of a metered, monitored approach, entrusting the land management agencies, making sure that the system's working, so that, for example, like in the moist forest, you can harvest in a metered, managed way. And be able to, the result would be, greater amounts of timber than there are right now. And yet you can still meet ecological goals, which is really primary for us. If you focus on ecological goals, you can still get timber out of forests, especially in the moist. In the dry, when you're talking about thinning, over, for example, a 30-year period, we are proposing, if you just do 3% of the forests in a restorative manner, using thinning and prescribed fire, you'll generate a lot of harvest, at least in thinning, in a sense of commercial thinning. And then if you get these systems to work, you'll be generating resources of funding that can pay for a lot of the actual work. But we also know that there's going to be a need for the public to be aware that it's going to cost more money to be able to maintain these forests. But we need to get on it. We need to do it at a scale that actually can work, so that we are meeting ecological goals, reducing the fire risk, or improving fire resilience, whilst also being able to make sure that we're generating more jobs and delivering products to the market, right? Wood products.
And your plan, this is like you said, it's going forward with the ecological security of the land itself, but you do talk about sustainable timber harvest. Do you think with your plan, and I'm one of those, I believe you can have it all. You can have the recreation, you can have the ecological, the conservation, and have timber harvest all at the same time. And you were talking about how much, that there may be more money to cost in the management of that. Why would it be more money to manage it if we could actually pull enough timber off of it? Or would your plan call for pulling enough timber off of it to pay for that management?
Well, I'll just, one caveat is that we don't have any projections on how much timber is being pulled off, just to let you know.
Okay.
But let's just look at the dry forest. If it's a 30-year plan for restoration, the dry forest ONC lands, let's say, are about 1.4 million acres. You will have thinning followed by prescribed fire, and then you will have to go in and do a little bit more fire to maintain those lands. Our prescriptions for dry forests are, we use the term aggressive, but we don't want to frighten people. But we are trying to meet historical conditions that we have come to become aware of before, in the pre-colonial times, before tribes were removed from the lands. The spacing, the densities, for example, of trees and the diversity of the trees is a lot different than we have right now. And obviously, timber practice in the past and somewhat in the present. But also, I think, basically that the lands have, as you say, have not been managed and have been allowed to get to the densities that really are unsafe, our at least for the dry forest, I can say that over those 30 years, there will be a lot more timber coming off of those lands in an ecologically sustainable way. And then I think something has to be rationalized going forward in the future as those lands are restored to the densities, diversity, and what we call sort of structural. Let me use my terms from our work: structural complexity, and basically having healthier forests that can be sustained over time. Because right now you have a lot of variability in what we call the age classes. So, it's just a lot of imbalance. In addition to being overstocked, there's a lot of imbalance in different age classes. And so that also contributes to preventing a full replete of species to be able to wildlife to be able to be living on those lands.
So would you quickly give us, I think you've now described 3 different classifications of ONC lands, of, the moist forest or wet forest, and tell us what the difference is and where they kind of are.
Yeah, let's do that. We maybe should have done that up front. So if you look at the dry forests, so in Southwest Oregon, primarily we have dry forests. These are largely because of the climate. It's a drier climate. The species, there's a range of different species. You have, your Douglas firs and other kinds of those kinds of trees, and oak trees in some areas as well. But largely the rainfall is a lot less, and the fire interval is also typically like 5 to 15 years. Now, one of the things about how we propose for the management of the dry forest is that the current high severity wildfire has reached up to 36% of all the fires that are on these lands. And we would like to reduce the incidence of high severity wildfire down to 5%. So from 36% to 5%. And so our program is designed really, honestly, as a restoration type approach to reducing the severity the frequency of high severity wildfire, so that honestly you only have basically 95% of all fires on these lands would be low to medium severity, which is how actually these lands were during the time of when the tribes were managing them exclusively. So that's part of how that whole approach works. And the moist forests are typically on the coast or in the northern areas on the west and in our western counties. And so there's a lot more rainfall. It's more frequent, and fires. What's interesting is that the whole question of the fire regime is changing a bit. It used to be the thought that a stand replacing fire is basically happening every 100 years or so. And in these forests now, because of the work of Andrew Merschel, who is up at the Oregon State University, and he did his PhD research a while ago, and now it has really started to take off, in which he was able to find in the Umpqua National Forest, actually, is where he focused his work. But of course, there's, as we said, Forest Service ONC lands there. And finding a lot more variability in fire intensity and frequency. And really what it was saying in part was that that actually tribal stewardship was common even in the moist forests and in sort of forests that we call transitional, which are some of the size of, like, if you were to look at a hillside in the transitional forest, you say that on the north and the east side, it would probably be a lot more moist, and on the west and the south, it would be a lot more dry. So it's that kind of different types of forests and different types of fire intervals is how we call it. So a special attention we have in terms of our management of those types of forests.
Now, I'm not sure if it's the Bureau of Land Management or the Department of Interior itself. There's the Northwest Forest Plan, and if I read correctly, they're getting ready to redo that, and that's why you're kind of moving on certain issues.
Yeah, and so that's the Forest Service, And that's cutting across Northern California all the way up to the state of Washington. So it's an enormous amount of land. The Forest Service lands that the ONC lands fall into here are about, as I said, about 500,000 of what would be essentially 7.1 million acres. And the lands that we're talking about cut across or are included in six different forests. So it is kind of spread out across the western side of the state. But what's good is that we can apply where there's dry forest, we have a dry forest strategy. Where there's moist, a moist forest strategy, and where there's transitional, kind of a blend of them. In the moist forest, the collaborators of Forest Bridges, when they were doing all of their research and studies back in the day, came across a historical graph that showed that 50% that the moist forests on the coasts were what we call 50% structurally complex old growth forests, that on average, that was kind of like the mix of forests. And nowadays they're about 25% or even a little bit less than that. So the goal of our moist forest strategy really starts with wanting to move those forests back to 50% structurally complex old growth, whilst also being able to have this sort of regenerative process with that a stand replacement fire does, which is creating complex early seral, or the first early stages of forests. And so we apply a particular approach in ecological forestry and ecological silviculture, which is called variable retention regeneration harvests. And that tries to emulate what a disturbance would, and largely a fire disturbance, would cause, in terms of you'd have some clumps of some trees, some openings, and essentially a range of kind of variability in how that particular area would look and start to grow and regenerate as a forest.
How do you determine that?
How do you determine it?
Yeah.
We determine how to do it, or
how do you determine, what areas you think there should be more open areas and areas where you should keep the older growth? And tell us what would you define as old growth trees?
Well, that's a good question, and for us, that's almost a trick question.
Okay.
And the reason, and I'm not putting you on a spot. I'm actually saying that there's a lot of, and certainly with the current administration and their effort to define old growth, we don't believe in reserves and fixed reserves of old growth per se, but we don't believe in taking them down. We believe in helping them to be vibrant, and we actually take this what we call an all lens approach, where fixed reserves, we don't keep those. Our approach is to go through the landscape and be able to, over a period, work on developing this 50% structurally complex old growth forest. So with the moist forest, you have about 1.5 million acres, let's say, of those kind of lands. So if you set that ecological goal of creating old growth over time, you're doing it in a way that instead of fixed reserves, there is going to be old growth, coming up around the forest, across the forest, whilst also these other stages are also in development. And with that, we feel that we can be having a healthier forest and if we're working on the structural complexity of a forest, we're also working on helping old growth to be protected, but not, like I think we've seen, some old growth forests that I think 20% of old growth forests, I think, have been declining in recent years because of these wildfires. And so we've come up with this strategy that, if you can, don't let them be sitting ducks, I guess is what we're trying to say in some ways, right? But to really see the larger picture of what it takes to support a sustainable, healthy, regenerative forest.
And so going back to the plan, how do you plan on, no irony there, but how do you plan on changing the plan to make it more applicable to what you're saying?
Yeah, so what we did was we produced, it's a big old paper here. You can go to our website, forestbridges.org, and find what is essentially a proposal, what we call an active conservation proposal, that the Forest Service, we'd like them to apply to the ONC lands, their ONC lands. And essentially, they had put out a notice of intent to conduct what is an environmental impact assessment or statement to say what would be the impact of changing the Northwest Forest Plan as it is right now. So we basically developed our proposal to submit it to them, and that's in their development or their updating of the Northwest Forest Plan. And so we one of the things that we were quite hopeful and why we felt we could apply at this time, this proposal, which we hope that they would use as an alternative, what we call a planning alternative. So as the 6 national forests in Western Oregon that contain the ONC lands develop their new forest plans, and it's been a long, long time coming. I mean, the Northwest Forest Plan, we know, came out in 1996, and little has changed since that time. So with new forest plans in these 6 forests, we're asking them to consider our proposals, model them so they get a better sense, not just of, I think, a range of different kinds of aspects of how the forest could be improved, how fire resilience could be gained, how timber could be ecologically harvested, et cetera, et cetera. So we're asking them to model it and consider it as an alternative. And it wouldn't also be a good idea if they decided to do some kind of a pilot of these approaches on some of these ONC forests that they manage. So that's kind of how we do it this way through the planning process. And for those who know, sometimes that isn't always the best way to see the biggest change, that someday, like I said earlier, Forest Bridges may need to consider legislative solutions or legislative approaches to make sure that we're actually seeing the kind of change that we want. We call it paradigm shifting change. And part of the other things that we want to see is a long-term collaborative like ours. And it's not from ego, it's just really from a sense of responsibility to have a collaborative engaged with the BLM and the Forest Service and do, proper, what we call adaptive management. So that the public and this collaborative could have a say in how they're managing the forest. And we're actually seeing outcomes. We know that several years ago, there was some, especially when ecological forestry was just coming out with Norm Johnson and Jerry Franklin, especially sort of in the lead. There were some pilots that happened in Southern Oregon, especially on these ONC lands, but it seemed like they all just died on the vine, if you will. They just didn't go where they needed to go. And we know, for example, one of the biggest challenges is that the methods that we're talking about haven't had enough day in the sun, if you will. They've not had enough chance to really be proven and shown to the public, as well as to those who might have the biggest concerns about these methods, just how they can work. So we're really hopeful, working through the planning process right now, at least, to impart and to be advocates for these kinds of approaches and to see how far we can go.
You said the plan, the Northwest Forest Plan, hasn't been redone since 1996. Like the habitat conservation plan that they're talking right now for state lands, do those plans from the federal government, are they extended out 20, 30, 40, 70 years like the habitat HPC plans, or is that just something they change when they want to change?
I think this is a really good question, Rob. I'm not sure that I even know. When I look at what we've responded to, and why did it take so long?
Mm-hmm.
How much loss did we have to have across, in terms of environmental loss, in terms of rural economies being so hard hit, in terms of, now we have, such wildfires and wildfire smoke impacting, people who, it's impacting all of us, but even the most vulnerable people. It's a lot to have to work to shift back into something that can produce in a way that can meet all those three areas: the environmental, the social, and the economic. But and I think part of Forest Bridges is that we want more people to be engaged and to get a hold of us and see where you can become, for example, a friend of Forest Bridges. Through our advocacy, we can lean on our public friends of Forest Bridges. These are people who believe in our principles of agreement, can stand behind us because we're doing really hard, important work to affect change. People have a lot of things on their minds. They're concerned about the economy. They're concerned about, every year choking down the smoke, figuring out if they can, leave their town for a little bit just to have some fresh air. But, the more of us that can really be engaged, the better. And we stand as an organization that wants to be, in kind of in the center, holding things together, attracting people who really want to see change and are willing to sit with us and work through whatever those barriers are that is preventing the change from happening. But we really, that's important to us.
Can you identify most, if not all, the stakeholders that you think are the ones who are involved with this mostly?
In terms of listing them all off,
Well,
I mean, I can give you
the major ones.
Yeah, well, I can definitely give you the categories, and I think that's that's fair enough. We have a lot of on the forest industry side. I can say that we have at least 20 different companies that either own land or run timber companies, mills and whatnot. And, they, I would say some of them have actually said, we see you as sort of a plan B. If things don't work out, for example, with the litigation, maybe you'll be the ones to step up and help support the kinds of solutions that we're talking about. And then on the conservation side, we have a few that are organizations, but largely it's individuals who are more on the conservation side. And as I said, more moderate, I would say. We tend not to, I'll tell you this, we set the table for everybody, and we have had people who may agree with us 80% on our principles of agreement, but that other 20%, maybe, that's sort of a deal breaker for them. But we still listen to them, and so they are at our table, and that's important to us. The tribes have been invaluable, especially since we believe that there's an important opportunity here to utilize traditional ecological knowledge, cultural burning, prescribed burning, allowing the tribes to be involved in co-management. This is really important. I think it is because they can lead the way and they can teach us in ways that they may be the only ones that really know how. I see how we're trying to, if Forest Bridges does work on the state level, we've been a member of the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council and have advocated for certain legislation to improve, again, the access to training, what we call burn bust programs, funding to be able to ensure that these activities can be done, and also working on the liability side. At the national level, the last year we've been a member of a Prescribed Fire Council that's been managed out of Colorado, but now it's even some folks that we know from Oregon that are involved in terms of managing the work group. We spent an inordinate amount of time on the EPA's regulations that they're changing right now for 2.5 particulate matter 2.5, which is basically the threshold of what they would allow for air pollution, and that the the particular regulations for air pollution have never really incorporated wildfire and prescribed fire, and there are these exceptional exceptions that states can apply for to be able to allow more of the prescribed fire. We always say, what kind of fire do you want? Do you want wildfire smoke, or would you like a little bit of the prescribed fire smoke? I spent the weekend in California, and I was driving up and saw a fair bit of prescribed fire in the landscape in places where I guess it wasn't too wet and raining. But yeah, so we're trying to help in all kinds of ways. But the regulatory environment and I guess sort of outmoded ways of approaching things, we're trying to push forward to have some breakthroughs in approaches here. Yeah.
So you said the Cow Creek were involved. What are some of the other tribes that are involved? Do you have others?
We have relationships with the Coquel. So part of what Forest Bridge is, we originally had a place at the table for tribes, and the Cow Creek were the first to sit at that table. And then it was decided that, all the tribes in Western Oregon, there's 9 tribes in Western Oregon, there's 5 of them that we would have the closest relationship with. And what happened was there was a spinoff and a development of a natural resources managers group that are tribal forest managers. And so they meet roughly on a quarterly basis. And Forest Bridges is usually invited in to be able to share what we're working on and to also get their feedback. Since we're producing a lot of papers and submissions to the various land management agencies, we always like their perspective in terms of how we're writing about tribal involvement and their methods, and so that's part of it. So we keep that engagement. So it's that group is coordinated by the Cow Creek, but it includes the CT Clusi, if you know that tribe,
yes,
the Coquel in your area,
right,
and the Grand Ronde and the Silettes. And this past year, we were really fortunate to be able to hire our own tribal liaison, specifically for a project that the Bureau of Land Management is working on, which is called Tribal Youth Forest Restoration and Seed Collection. And so they're funding tribal youth to be involved in helping the BLM to better understand traditional ecological knowledge and ethnobotany, and be able to also perhaps set up some of the tribal youth in their own small businesses. Because that's one of the other things we know still needs a lot of attention is the ability to reproduce, to have nurseries and to have the kinds of, special plants that they might, traditional plants that they might be growing, but also seedlings for reforestation. Yeah.
So one of the things you just said, where you were talking about the prescribed burnings, and I could see a necessity of that, but compare that to what you're talking about with the type of timber harvest that you're in and I forget the ecological timber harvest that you're talking about, compared to the what is it called, the clear cuts, and many in here in Coos County right now, the county accelerated the land cut, the clear cuts from 40, the timber harvest from 40 years, from 50 years down to 40 years. And we have a lot of clear cuts here. And part of it is because the county was worried about lawsuits, environmentalists suing the county and stopping them from being able to harvest the timberlands on county lands. This is not ONC lands, but why would you think that, it's, I'm not a forester, but why would it be better to do a prescribed burn than just not go in there and do a clear cut?
Yeah, we don't propose clear cuts at all. Okay. We feel that's not the best way to ecologically manage forests for the long term. But if you look at, let's take a look at moist forests and applying what we said, because we're trying to reach 50% structural harvest, structural complexity of old growth. what we're doing is we're applying these methodologies where you would have like I said, there'd be less than 2 acres worth of openings. Basically, it's a lot less. It's not a clear cut at all, and so you're having some clumps and gaps, and just really trying to emulate an area so that it actually emulates what a major disturbance would be like without it being a clear cut, because we feel clear cuts really, in the traditional sense that you're talking, will not get us to the structural complexity that we're trying to seek over time. And so in our way of managing too, we did some modeling using BLM data and realized through our conversations with OSU scientists that you could first of all, we were able through our modeling to be able to show that there was an inordinate amount of younger forests and not enough of these other age classes going up to old growth. And in our model, which I can't put in front of you, but basically we're able to show that there is harvestable forest right now that by harvesting it in what we call a light touch manner. So over using variable retention harvests over about 180 years, we would be able to get to that 50% goal of structural complex old growth and be able to harvest in a way that can be reducing the excesses in certain younger age classes and creating greater variability and diversity within those forests and forest habitats over time. So our methodology is very methodical, metered. Even though we were using 2006 data, we think we should have it modeled again. It's very expensive to have approaches such as this modeled. So that's why we turn to the BLM and the Forest Service and we say, we've thought long and hard about this. We have some really good ideas here, and we'd really like you to be able to apply them and see for yourself whether this will work.
Now, when you're doing that modeling, depending on how you define an old growth tree, wouldn't that change the outcome of the modeling results?
We're looking, yeah. So first of all, we don't believe in a specific age, although in the modeling, we said, okay, if half the forest is younger and half the forest is older, we'll just arbitrarily put, at that time it was 160 years. Okay, but we don't do that. We don't measure, the amount, the girth of a tree or the diameter of a tree. We look at if you look at old growth, there's different layers and complexity. We look to the species that would be living there. So we're very multi-species rather than single species. And we think that has been some of the problem in terms of being focused. Where you put your focus is kind of where you go. Yeah. And we think, putting it into more multi-species is a better way to go for the whole of the forest and for its sustainability and its progression into these older age classes. So that's part of what we're saying with our work. We found that and lately what we've said too is you can use this variable retention, regeneration, harvest approach and still be able to do some thinning where it's needed so that you might be able to reduce the time it's going to take to reach that goal of 50% structural complex old growth. But we definitely stay away from saying it's a specific age or a specific diameter. For the most part, we're basically saying, there are characteristics of these forests because it varies. You could go on the coast and it's a little bit different than if you're inland or other places. And in dry forests, of course, they have old growth as well there. So it's very site specific in our way of looking at things.
Now I'm someone who I've talked to county commissioners all across the state, and one of the things that when we get on the conversation of the ONC lands, many of the county commissioners are of a mindset that since they don't think, and this is pretty common among a lot of them, and to a certain extent, I agree with them, since the BLM is not managing them the way they think is a proper way to manage them. A lot of the counties would like to see those O&C lands revert back to the counties and then let the counties manage them. And what would you think of that idea?
That's an interesting idea, because I really want to be careful, because I think we haven't, as a collaborative, talked about that per se. I think our scenario is that those lands will remain federal lands, but I think at the end of the day, Robin, I don't want to just skirt this. I would say that we want the best for those lands and for the people who rely on them. We have a particular proposal. And if those lands were to revert to the counties, I think the question for Forest Bridges would be, would we turn to the counties and say, we'd really hope that our our proposals would also be considered. And I think what we're saying is that this day and age, with the stresses that their forests are undergoing, and change that's happening on the planet, I'll just say it that way. We still think that some of our approaches might help in creating peace and balance across the land, because I think there's some people that are really worried too that they wouldn't want forests to be managed any other way but more of an ecological way.
And in many ways, I completely agree with that, because we have to rely on those forests for many different things. I mean, the world, it's, the earth is a living, breathing planet. It has to have certain elements on the world, on earth, so that the rest of us can survive. And so that is something that I do agree with you that it's a snowball's chance in hell that the counties would ever get that land back. I just don't really see that happening at any point in time, to be honest with you. But I posed the question because it seems like it would, if you could go to the individual counties, if they did get that land back, you might find counties who were more politically applicable to doing things like the way you're discussing it, even though there may be other counties. And I'll tell you, our Coos County would probably be one of them, that they would want to manage it the way they manage their land. And it may not be the same idea as what your group is coming out with. So, I don't know. It seems like you might be able to, with more counties involved with the different lands going to the counties, you might have more success in certain lands where if the BLM doesn't listen to you, then you're really going to kind of lose out on being able to do what you would like to do, because they're not going to take that proposal. They're just going to do, what the federal government wants.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, it may come down to legislative change that really has to happen to do that. The counties, we're very much in support of the counties, obviously, because we want them to succeed in their ability to provide services with resources. And we have very close relationship with some of the counties right now. Douglas County and Coos County have been supportive of us. And I think, again, it's sort of like Plan B, or something that, I think it's because we are trying to help carve the path towards better solutions for these lands. I mean, it pains us to see, wildfires every year that could be prevented. And, there is, this long term of it's not just about the fact that we have fire suppression that's in the way. That we do know that there's a lot of management issues, and it's a very complex situation. But we're really feeling like we could fill the gap as an organization by being an organization that really attracts people who want to be truthfully at the solution end of things.
And hopefully the U.S. Forest Service will also have more of an open ear to what you're suggesting. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're very, it seems culturally different than the BLM, and we don't know them quite as well, obviously. We've been starting to develop some relationships with the Forest Service. And so I think we'll see how this Northwest Forest Plan can be updated in a way. I have some hope there, and I'm seeing hopefully that there's more resources being put into, mitigating wildfire but it's a huge shift actually to be able to get these forests back into order. And the clock is ticking. We're behind time.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, that's, no bureaucracy moves with any kind of swift speed. And I think that part of the reason you're finding a little more willingness from the U.S. Forest Service is maybe the fact that BLM is under the Department of Interior, where the U.S. Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture. And I think that they have more of a sense of urgency about what they want to do with those types of things. Do you think that's true when you work with the two different agencies?
It would seem that the BLM is definitely moving faster. Like I said, our co-founder Rick Sohn and I and our tribal liaison Zena went down to meet with Jerry Franklin. And also a couple of other people who I'll say are anonymous, but they're scientists and foresters. And he said, I'm really proud of the BLM. They are at the forefront of ecological forestry. It's just that they're being prevented from doing it at the scale that it's necessary to be able to return our forests back to health and to be able to provide, the jobs, the timber, and other important outcomes for the community and the society as a whole. So they have these methods. Even the Forest Service has variable retention harvest and other things. But if you're not doing it at the scale that matters, then you're actually maybe even just reinforcing the problem. And I think that there's a lot of evidence of that out there, where if you're not, for example, in the dry forest, thinning enough, it's just growing back, and I think there's been a hesitancy to apply prescribed fire. Obviously, it can be, we've had some incidences now, let's say on the Forest Service side, where escape fires and all that, and the Forest Service staff on the east side of the state that was arrested, and I believe now is been fined. I think something happened recently, so I don't know the exact outcome of that, but there's a lot going on here. And it's an uphill battle everywhere we turn, but we're pretty tenacious because we believe in something's got to give somewhere. And again, it really has, I will just reiterate, the more the public can get engaged on this is really important to us, because if you're not communicating to your legislators, if you're standing back on your heels and say, well, there we go again, or if we're just complaining isn't going to get the change that we need. And so it's unfortunate that in the course of human history, it's often the case that we have to be in crises to move, but let's not go into collapse. And that will really, then how do we move?
And I think part of the problem is, okay, we were, at the beginning of this conversation, we were distinguishing between the ONC lands, the Wagon Road lands, and I just had Dr. Bob Zybach on the show to talk about the Elliott Forest, which is state lands. And I think a lot of the reason people don't get involved is I think they're a little confused of which land it belongs to which agency and who they should be talking to. And of course, I always tell them, just go to your legislature and explain to them, and they'll probably know. But do you think that convoluted thing is really what kind of prevents people from speaking up?
I think in some sense, yes. You go into any any part of the forest and you're not sure who is really managing it or who owns it, right?
Right.
But I think I just always want to say to people, especially when I speak about the federal lands, I mean, these are public lands, right? You own them really, ultimately. So it's kind of like if your teachers aren't teaching your kids well, don't you go to your teachers and say, hey, something's going on here? It's the same with land management. But I think, land management is affecting all of us in such a way. I think, and then we're trying as Forest Bridges on a very complex topic to help people to parse out, what is important for us to speak up about, or even for us when we're engaging the public. Some people will come to us and say, they don't want to know about the management side. It's too, they just are afraid of wildfire, and so we say, well, it is about management at some level, but
right.
Whatever, we're still learning. I've been around for 2 years, and Charlene, you mentioned, she and I work on our social media. And one thing that we're trying right now is to do some campaigns where we focus on particular audiences with particular messages. And what's been beautiful is that we get some comments in our comment section after we've put out a campaign. Our current one's called Let's Clear the Air Together, or something like that. And it's basically, let's clear the air as, our differences, but also let's clear the air and let's, manage these forests properly. And we can help you to learn how that can be. But we look in the comments and we see different people responding. And sometimes it's harsh and without hope, or even offensive. But many times, and here's where we see the modeling of, leaders that emerge from community, where they say, well, I like this, I like that, can you tell us more about that? And so then we'll start responding to them, and hopefully if other people are paying attention to the comments. I have a friend who says, oh, I never look at comments. I'm like, I learned so much in comments. Sometimes right, I'm watching a video or reading something, and before I know it, it's really in the comments where I'm elevating my education even more. So this is part of what we're trying to do with public engagement is to have that dialogue and to get people. We want to give people more hope. I mean, like you say, it's hard when things aren't moving, but we do want to give people hope, and we want people to be inspired and motivated to get inside this now and help us. And we can't do it alone. Yeah,
that's and it seems like you're working with a balancing act, and that's really what forest management is all about. And you're not going to make everyone happy, because you got people who are just cut it all down, and then you've got the people who no, don't touch it, just let it go back to rewilding. And to me, neither approach is going to work. I think that humans are here for a reason, and those forests, if we want to make them available for future generations, we can't just let them burn up. We can't just cut them completely down, and we have to do something in the best ability that we can. And I think that's part of evolving as a species, is trying to figure out the best ways to maybe not make everyone happy, but find that more medium area, and you've got a pretty tough job, lady.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's just it. And I think you just really said it so well. It's hard to imagine any approach on the more extreme side really sustaining forests, but also bringing people together. And so our whole approach has been, let's bring as many people as we can together to work this out. I mean, we wish that we could be managing the lands at some level, you know what I mean? Because we already know we have a lot of great solutions that are coming from a lot of great minds and hearts and different perspectives, and it's like we've winnowed it down to a set of principles that we think are pretty comprehensive. Some of them are very much paradigm shifting, like I said, about our all lands approach. Really to move from this fixed reserve approach. You can move from the fixed reserve approach, but you can still do, developing old growth and maintaining it and sustaining it, but taking a multi-species approach, so that that's really kind of at the forefront and not just focusing so narrowly, because it really hasn't been working. And
Right.
what I was impressed with, I went to the board when I had asked them, is it time now, because the Northwest Forest Plan's being updated, is it time for Forest Bridges to contribute to that? And they said yes. And I said, I read the assessment that was done, and I said, I think it's really hopeful for us. I mean, it may not be the whole of everything, but they've started to say, that they're trying to say we didn't, the goals that we had in that plan have not all come to fruition.
Right.
I mean, sometimes they'll kind of water it down a bit, but if you read that assessment that they did, the bioassessment for the region of the Northwest Forest Plan, there is a lot that they have admitted needs to change. And so it needs to change for the better. And so that's where we jumped on the train and said, we're gonna at least put our best ideas forward for them.
Yeah, and that's just it. And like I said, any government bureaucracy, they're not only are they hard at changing their direction, but sometimes they're just even more difficult at admitting we were wrong, that what we were doing was wrong, and we need to try another approach. Let's listen to other people, and that's just the nature of bureaucracies.
Mm-hmm.
So getting to that.
Yeah.
You were talking about the lawsuits, and about the lawsuit that the ONC counties have going forward. They're going to the Supreme Court. I think it's going to be heard on March. Well, I forget the date that it's going to be presented to the Supreme Court, and kind of explain how that type of lawsuit has affected you and any of the environmental type of lawsuits, because we're talking two completely different animals when you're going to the judicial side of this argument.
Yeah, well, I think it's just been really very interesting. I liked how this lawsuit was shaped around really important principles I think we all as Americans have to pay attention to. And that is, if people don't already know, that there's questions about the application of the ONC Act on one level, but it's really talking about, if you look at, I don't know if people are aware of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument and how the Antiquities Act, the president, first it started with Clinton and then it was Obama, and there was a lawsuit against the expansion of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument, which took into it more of the ONC lands. So that meant ONC lands were taken off the table in terms of sustained yield and what they can produce in terms of obviously revenues for the counties to serve the people. And so the question, one of the questions in that lawsuit that's going up to the Supreme Court, and I think, Rob, what you're telling me is that has the Supreme Court actually accepted it now? Because that must have just happened. Is that true?
That's what I thought the commissioner said. That
well, that's great. I mean, we haven't really heard it, but anyway, it'll be interesting. So the first argument is, what does the president have that ability to use the Antiquities Act to basically override a congressional act, the act of the ONC Act of 1937. So that is, it's Civics 101. We're in that class right now as Americans. And then the second one is in the 2016 RMP, which is the Resource Management Plan for Western Oregon for the BLM. Could and I guess it would have been the Secretary of the Interior, or would have been the anyway. I think it
would have been the Interior. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but basically, it's the BLM. Could they again not utilize the ONC Act as the sort of the primary act and sort of and sort of allow all these other laws to go, I guess, on par? I think that's kind of what.
Right. Do the laws override?
Right, but I think that's it. Yeah. So again, I think it's we're at a really interesting time, I think, in our country where questions like this, it's important for them to be answered because they do set precedent.
Huge.
Obviously, huge precedent.
Yeah.
And that actually makes everybody have to go back to the drawing board again, if for example, that case is overturned or doesn't go anywhere, or gets stalled. And I feel for the counties, and this is and for those who are trying to at least get those questions answered, because it does take a lot of resources to do that. And I think it's a very principled approach. Again, we're still here with our approaches and our solutions, but as they're going for that, we've actually said that if they win or lose, there may still be a need for some of the ways that Forest Bridges is proposing.
Either way.
Yeah.
The only difference is who would you be answering to, I guess, would be the question, because the first question about the antiquities and whether the president can do that is really puts that a presidential order going over a congressional law, a congressional act. And the second one is do we use that congressional act as the basis of what we decide, because none of the laws that have been passed forward were actual congressional acts that overrode that first 1939 act. I mean, we're going back almost 100 years. We're looking at that, and so the counties are, really kind of thrilled about this, because if they win, that means my taxes won't go up here, is kind of what that means, because we're going to be getting a lot more money from what the yields from the money we would get from the yields that were being pulled and harvested. And so this is something that we talk about on a regular basis when you go to the county commissioners meetings. And so I'm glad to hear that this may benefit you as far as what you can do working with, let's say, if the Bureau of Land Management then has to follow the ONC Act, seems like they would almost have to kind of want to follow a new direction, because what they've been doing hasn't been working, number one. And number two, they're going to have to look at something new because they lost the lawsuit. Isn't that the way it stands?
Well, I think that we're still going to have, I think we're thinking that our proposals need to be at the table no matter what. I mean, I think we do believe that, but I think whatever will sort of move forward in this ecological approach and mitigate all these barriers to restoration of the dry forest and just, good solid management. So there's a combination of barriers, right? There's the lawsuits. There's a lack of resources. We have issues around capacity. This generational gap of not having enough, young folks going in to forest management, whether it's restoration or, forestry is also challenging, and all the different associated professions related to healthy forest management. So I think that's a big issue. I know even the tribes are having the struggle, as they are, like the Cow Creek as an example, acquiring more lands to manage and trying to build the workforce, that can help them. I think so. There's a big question about, we need the young people to get more engaged and more involved. I think there are great opportunities at the academic level. And if the academic level isn't there, there's Conservation Corps. I know in Douglas County, there's a great program out of the Phoenix School, and our board chair, Thomas McGregor, is working on that. It's been a very successful youth conservation program. So there's all that. It's an exciting time. It's has a little bit of an edge of danger, if you will, right? Just because we could go certain different ways. But I think what we really want is for a more engaged, enlightened public to be involved, and for these separations of powers to be sorted out in the way that I think that they were originally intended, right?
Let me ask you, just, this is kind of coming out of left field, but talking about the younger generation, there's kind of an oxymoron about the way they kind of think. They're the most, and this is just from my experience, most of the younger generation is extreme environmentalists. They're at one end of it, where it's, we don't want any logging, we just want wilding and no touching or managing of the forest. And yet they're the least this latest generation that's come about are the least ones who want to go out into the forest and find those vocations to actually kind of figure out what they're talking about as far as the environment itself. You know what I mean? They're not really learning it. They're just hearing it being taught. These, in many ways, it's an ideology that's being taught, and like I said, there's extremes on all ends, but it's an ideology that the young generation is being taught, but yet they're also not going out there and taking these jobs in the forest, learning forest management, learning, you know, the species and all the stuff that it takes to, you know, that mind wealth that we have to figure out better management practices. It seems like an oxymoron that, you know, you get that kind of extreme, but not as much involvement. Do you see that as well, or is that just something
No, I think, you know, I've seen that and been concerned about that myself. I think it takes, you know, I think when I was growing up, you know, I threw myself into the Peace Corps and went overseas, you know, to get out of my box. I really, for some reason, I just felt like I would be a risk taker, and certainly it was scary, but
what a fun time though, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know, I
really.
survived it, but, you know, and I don't want to be too critical of the youth, but I do think this is a challenge, to be, you know, in a place where some generalizations are being made that don't always have a basis in the truth of how things are. And I think, you know, it would be great. I worked up in Portland for 10 years in disaster preparedness, but yet I had rural counties in the midst of more urban cities and counties. I had, you know, Columbia County and Clackamas County. And
Right.
I think to know and to understand that the rural communities are such a critical part of the success of our entire state, and that a lot of them are very land-based and obviously natural resources. And so it's like a lot of those counties are receiving, you know, people from the urban areas. But what we need to do is to be able to help educate, especially when the youth might be coming out to go hiking or something, to help them to better understand how economies work at best. And then again, we're more about, you know, a moderate, modulated kind of approach to things. And I think unfortunately, the picture they've seen has been a lot of more of the extreme. So they haven't had a more modulated, positive picture of what, like, for example, the forest industry really can be for everybody.
And you know, that's, you know, it's because the major population is in the larger cities, and I've been fortunate in my lifetime. I've lived on ranches, and I've lived in the country, and I've lived in the city as well. For a good portion of my life, I lived in a big city, and I've seen the differences, and I've seen how important it is that there's a symbiotic relationship that sometimes that goes unrecognized by people who live in a city that don't understand their food comes from the rural world and the rural places that exist in our world. And you know, we love nature, and there's a lot of times we're looked at as a bunch of rubes who just want to cut down everything, kill everything, and it's probably the furthest from the truth. We have to have fish to be able to harvest out of the ocean. We have to have the forest so we can harvest timber and all the animals that we live off of. And we have to have the farms and the ranches to provide the rest of the food. And if we didn't, cities would starve. But when you talk to a lot of people in the cities, and like I said, I've known this because I lived in the city, it seems like they kind of forget that aspect of the rural area, and it just seems kind of unfair. And once again, I don't like that overall generalization, but I do see that does kind of permeate a good portion of people who do live in metropolises.
Yeah, I mean, like I've said, I've lived in cities, and I'm drawn to the rural area because I think it feels more calm and healing, and there's so,
Yeah.
like, I can't believe how green it is right now. Like I went to Charlotte the other day, and I was like, is there a new color of green? Because there's like this intensity of green.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've had a lot of rain and not enough snow, of course, but yeah, I don't know. I think the healing process. There will be at some point a need for people to heal over all of this, because the ruptures in our society and the polarization is something that is tearing us apart rather than helping us to get together. So, and I think our younger generations, I'm just really pulling for them to help to kind of come to us and work with us.
Yeah, well, that's part of that symbiotic relationship. We
Yeah,
have to have
absolutely.
them there because I'm getting older and I'm going to need those folks. And so, yeah, it's and we've got a lot of great kids out here, and
Mhm.
I've met great kids in the city who, like I said, I don't like to generalize, and they do, and they have credible ideas, and I have great hope for it. You see a lot of the turmoil and upheaval that's going on in society right now, and I also believe that kind of has to happen too, because that's part of the evolving process. But I do hope it gets back to where we do come to a more general agreement that we need each other. You know what I mean? And we need the earth providing for us, and if we don't treat it right, we don't do right by it. It's it's like when you find out 50% or more of the forest fires are caused by people, it just makes me want to scream. You know what I mean? So figure it out, folks. And but
Yeah,
it's like I said, I do have hope that some point we will come to a rational place again.
I think it's a good hope to have, and I think we're all. I know Forest Bridges. We're working our best to try to be, a convener and a healing organization, and an organization that really is trying to take steps forward rather than just talk. I think we're really trying to move forward. Yeah.
So before I get you out of here, because
Yeah.
I want to thank you for coming on. It's
Yeah,
been
it's
a
been great.
great.
Thank
I,
you.
I love this conversation because, like I said, it's very important to I think a lot of people out there. And anything you want to tell my audience before you get out of here?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, how you can always get a hold of us, which is please go on our website, forestbridges.org. Have a look, mosey around. There's a lot of content there. Some of it's in abbreviated form, which is a little bit more accessible than some of our longer papers. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and even LinkedIn, if you're so inclined. So you can get a hold of us through our website or those social media. And if you happen to be in Eugene, for the next few days, we're having a booth at the Oregon Logging Conference. And we try to appear at different conferences. Again, we're a balanced organization, so we will go up to another conservation organization conference soon. But this weekend, it's for the forest industry to kind of talk to those folks. And so, yeah, we're out there, and we'd love to hear from you. And there's a great opportunity to become a friend of Forest Bridges. It doesn't cost anything. And what it means is that you put your name in the hat to be able to say that you like our ideas and can support them.
That's great. I love it.
Go to the website, and there's a click on button there. If you're so inclined to donate too, we would always be grateful for that. We are a nonprofit, 501c3, and very fiscally responsible, very small team, working really hard. And a lot of our board is all voluntary, and together we're all trying to do our best for the public.
That's great, and I appreciate what you're doing, Denise.
Yeah,
And
Rob, this has been wonderful. Thank you.
I will air this Monday, and I'll send you a link to it. And
Thanks.
yeah, no problem. And thank you so much. You have a
Thank you too.
wonderful night. Okay.
Yeah, take care. All the
All right.
best.
Bye bye. All right. That was a great conversation that definitely need to be had, because I think there are a lot of questions out there that people just don't understand the where to find those answers. And I think Denise Barnett did a great job of providing those answers. And like she said, you can go to forestbridges.org. That's forestbridges.org, and check out all the wonderful stuff they have on their website. I think would be a good learning thing. And and I know some people aren't going to always agree with her, the forest practices. I know there are different ideas to it, and it's maybe that's why we have a lot of forest. Maybe we're just going to have to practice to find out which one is best, and that's just a learning curve that we're going to have to continue. And a lot of us are getting older, and that's why we need the younger generation, so we can pass that information, pass that wealth, that knowledge down to the next generation. Because if you don't learn from people who've been in the business, who have been in the industry, who actually have gone out and managed forests, then you're just starting from scratch, and you don't want to do that. You really don't want to do that, because it benefits you to learn from people who've already been there and made mistakes. And I always tell people, old people aren't wise because they're so intelligent. People are wise because they were stupid at one point in time, made mistakes, and hopefully learned from those mistakes. And the wise people are the ones who did learn from those mistakes. So it's going to happen. If nobody's ever been alive that can't say they've screwed up. And so I just think that these are just wonderful conversations that have to be had. And we're going to put this out on Monday. I'm not going to do the regular live show, but let's see. We're going to, and we're not going to play Where's 3H Tree Service. So we'll just be doing this as a recording. It'll just go out live over the platforms. I want to thank a couple of people. First off, 3H Tree Service. 3H Tree Service, one of my sponsors. They've been with me for a couple of years now. If you want to get a hold of them, it's 541-294-1800. And talk to Matt Holman, and he can hook you up if you need to get rid of some of those trees, because not every tree needs to become an old growth tree, especially one that's growing into your living room, and so he can take care of that. I can tell you right now, 3H Tree Service, they remove those trees with surgical precision. They're also the only tree service in Coos County that has an arborist license from the Oregon Landscape Contractors Board, and 3H Tree Service strives to stay current in the industry standards to provide better services to their clients. You can also go to 3H Tree Service on Facebook. They have really great videos up there. The guys will be way up there, 90 feet in the air, with a chainsaw with one hand, taking out those trees. And they'll show the view of the ocean or the rest of the forest. And those guys, they do some badass work. I have to give them much credit for what they do. Tom and Gigs, of course, we didn't have Tim on here today because I'm recording this early. So I'll have to call up Tim and let him know that I did promote his business, Tom and Gigs. If you want an RC car, you need to get your muffler redone, you want the tonneau covers, you need help with your car, I suggest that you go to Tom and Gigs. They're one of the best places that you can go to for those automotive needs, and Tim will hook you right up. Those RC cars, they're incredible, and they've got an incredible selection of really cool remote control cars. And the nice thing is if you go to Tom and Gigs, they've got several walls and several stands where it's just full of parts for RC cars. So if you got an RC car and you need a part for it, go see Tom and Gigs. They can get it for you and hook you up with a shirt or a hat. Incredible stuff there. And of course, Oregon Firearms Federation. I was just talking to Kevin Starrett today, and a lot of stuff is going on with our Second Amendment. They're trying to take away our firearms. Let's face it, they're trying to disarm the country. Yeah, defund the police, disarm the country, and release the criminals. Yeah, what could go wrong, right? What could go wrong? Well, Oregon Firearms Federation. If you want to give to a good gun group, a no compromise Second Amendment organization, I highly recommend you look up Oregon Firearms Federation. And I once again want to thank my guest, Denise Barrett from Forest Bridges. And you got to go back to Rumble. You got to check out some of the things that I have done on Rumble lately. Please go like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube page. That's YouTube at Rob Taylor Report or Rumble at Rob Taylor Report. I just did an interview with Sheriff Mark Lamb, and it just went out last week. It went out last Tuesday, and really good interview. Really good. Matt Wilbanks helped me out. He was co-hosting with me. And so go to Rumble. Go to Rumble at Rob Taylor Report. Go to YouTube at Rob Taylor Report, and you can check it out. You can catch me on Facebook at Rob Taylor Report. Once again, all my social media has the same name, Rob Taylor Report, and so you can check out all of that stuff there. And if you want to help me out, you want to keep this show going, go to Rumble, go to YouTube, go to Facebook, become my friend, like my page, subscribe to my pages, and that helps me out quite a bit. It helps me grow the audience because you get more and more replays, and that helps the show grow. So I hope all of you out there are having an excellent day, and I don't know what kind of day it's going to be on Monday. But like I said, we're recording this February 21st, so I hope you enjoy it. That'll be February 26th when this gets aired. So, we got a lot of guests come up. You won't believe the guests I may be able to get on this show. It's going to be pretty cool. We're going to be able to get some really cool people on here, and inform the audience. And we're going to keep fighting for all the things that we believe in: the American way, the Constitution, the rights of the individual. We're going to continue that. I won't ever stop. And so until they put me in a pine box and shove me into the ground. And so until then, until next week, carry on, Coos County, carry on.